Welcome back to the channel. Every age of humanity is defined by a material. The Stone Age, the Bronze Age, and then came the age that reshaped the world forever. An age born in fire and forged through struggle. An age where common earth became the foundation of empires. This is where history hardens into iron. Imagine a world forged in fire, where the ringing of hammers shapes the destiny of nations. For thousands of years, humanity relied on bronze, a metal of the elite, rare and beautiful. But then, the old world collapsed, and from the ashes, a new material emerged, darker, harder, and infinitely more abundant. This is the story of the Iron Age. To understand the Iron Age, we first have to understand what came before. The Bronze Age was an era of palaces and trade networks that spanned continents, relying on tin and copper. When these trade routes were severed around 1200 BC, civilizations crumbled. But necessity is the mother of invention. Without tin to make bronze, smiths turned to the red earth beneath their feet. Iron is the fourth most common element in the Earth's crust, but unlocking it requires intense heat and sophisticated technology. Unlike copper, you can't just melt iron in a simple campfire. You need a bloomery, a specialized furnace capable of reaching temperatures that would melt the very stones of the previous age. The process was grueling. The ore had to be roasted, crushed, and mixed with charcoal inside these towering clay chimneys. The goal wasn't to melt the iron into liquid, but to create a bloom, a spongy mass of hot iron and slag. It was an ugly, lumpen thing that held the potential to change everything. Once the bloom was extracted, the real work began. It had to be hammered repeatedly while red hot to drive out the impurities. This constant folding and striking aligned the crystalline structure of the metal. It was here, on the anvil, that chemistry met brute force to create wrought iron.
The immediate advantage of iron wasn't actually its quality. Early iron swords were often softer than good bronze and could bend in battle. The advantage was economics. Iron ore was everywhere. You didn't need international trade routes to arm a soldier. Suddenly, weapons weren't just for the elite chariot drivers, they were for everyone.
This democratization of metal changed the face of warfare forever. In the Bronze Age, armies were small and professional. In the Iron Age, a king could equip thousands of peasants with iron spears and helmets. The scale of conflict exploded, leading to larger battles and higher casualties than ever before.
But iron didn't just take lives, it sustained them. Perhaps even more important than the sword was the iron plowshare. Bronze was too precious to drag through the rocky earth, so farmers had used wood. An iron plow, however, could cut through heavy clay soils and clear deep roots, opening up vast new lands for farming. With the iron axe, humanity waged war on the forests. Dense woodlands that had stood for millennia were cleared rapidly to make way for fields and pastures. This agricultural revolution led to a massive population boom. More food meant more people, and more people meant bigger cities. As populations grew, society became more complex. We see the rise of the first true superpowers. The Iron Age is the era of the Neo-Assyrian Empire, a war machine built entirely on the logic of iron. They were the first to fully integrate iron weapons into every branch of their military. The Assyrians didn't just use iron for weapons, they used it for engineering. They built massive siege engines, battering rams tipped with heavy iron heads that could smash through mud brick walls. No city was safe. They perfected the art of organized warfare, using terror and technology as tools of statecraft.
However, iron technology wasn't uniform across the globe. In China, during the Zhou dynasty, they developed a completely different method. They built blast furnaces capable of melting iron completely, allowing them to cast it like bronze. This put them centuries ahead of the West in terms of production volume.
Back in the Near East and the Mediterranean, the mastery of iron led to the blacksmith becoming an almost mythical figure. The smith was one of the few people who understood the secrets of the elements. In many cultures, they were feared and respected, believed to have magical powers over fire and earth.
As the Iron Age progressed, we learned to manipulate the metal further. By adding small amounts of carbon, often from the charcoal fuel itself, smiths accidentally created steel. This steeled iron was harder and held an edge far better than raw iron. It was the difference between a tool that bent and a weapon that killed. The widespread availability of iron also shifted the balance of power away from the old river valley civilizations. Barbarian tribes in Europe, like the Celts of the Hallstatt and La Tène cultures, became formidable. They sat on top of rich iron deposits and became master metalworkers, creating intricate swords and heavy chainmail. This era also saw the invention of the alphabet. While not made of iron, the alphabet flourished in the Iron Age. The Phoenicians spread it, and the Greeks and Romans adapted it. Just as iron democratized warfare, the simple phonetic alphabet democratized literacy, moving writing from the hands of scribes to the merchants and citizens. Trade networks rebuilt themselves, stronger than before. Iron bars were sometimes used as currency before coins were invented. But soon, the Kingdom of Lydia produced the first standardized coins. This economic revolution, driven by the efficiency of the Iron Age states, allowed for standing armies and professional mercenaries.
Let's look at the Persian Empire, the Achaemenids. They inherited the iron technology of the Assyrians and Babylonians, but applied it to administration. They built the royal road connecting their vast empire. Iron tools maintained the road, and iron shoes protected the hooves of the horses that carried the mail.
The climax of the Iron Age in the West came with the rise of Rome. The Roman legions were the ultimate expression of Iron Age organization. Their gladius swords, their pilum spears, and their ironclad discipline allowed them to conquer the known world. They turned the production of iron weapons into an industrial assembly line.
But the Iron Age wasn't just about the Mediterranean. In Africa, the Nok culture developed iron smelting independently around 1000 BC, skipping the Bronze Age entirely. They created stunning terracotta sculptures and advanced iron tools, proving that this technological leap was a global phenomenon. Agriculture continued to intensify. With better iron tools, farmers could build intricate irrigation systems and terraces. This surplus of food allowed for a leisure class to emerge: philosophers, poets, and scientists. The intellectual explosion of the classical era stands on a foundation of iron farming tools. Iron also revolutionized construction. We began to see the use of iron clamps in masonry, holding massive stone blocks together in Greek temples and Persian palaces. It allowed for architecture to reach new heights in stability, creating monuments that would last for thousands of years. However, this progress came at a cost. The environmental impact of the Iron Age was severe. The demand for charcoal to fuel the smelters led to the deforestation of huge swathes of Europe and the Near East. The ancient landscape was permanently altered to feed the furnaces. Warfare also became more brutal. The wounds caused by iron weapons were often fatal or led to terrible infections. Ancient surgeons had to invent new tools, also made of iron and bronze, to extract arrowheads and treat deep lacerations. Medical science advanced hand in hand with the science of killing. The social structure shifted too. In the Bronze Age, the king was often seen as a god. In the Iron Age, while kings were still powerful, the rise of a wealthy merchant class and a well-armed citizenry began to challenge absolute authority. We see the seeds of republics and early democracy. Let's return to the forge. By the late Iron Age, blacksmiths were experimenting with pattern welding, twisting rods of iron and steel together to create blades that were both flexible and hard. These were the ancestors of the famous Damascus steel and Viking swords, works of art as much as weapons. The Iron Age also redefined the household. Iron knives, needles, shears, and pots became common. Cooking, clothing production, and daily maintenance became easier. For the average family, life was still hard, but they had tools that their ancestors couldn't have dreamed of.
Transportation changed with the iron-rimmed wheel. This made wagons and chariots more durable on rough terrain. It facilitated migration, allowing tribes to move vast distances with their families and goods. The map of the world was redrawn by people moving on iron wheels.
Religious practices evolved as well. Iron was sometimes seen as a deterrent to spirits, a belief that persisted into folklore as cold iron warding off fae or demons. Votive offerings of iron weapons were thrown into lakes and bogs, gifts to the gods of war and earth.
The transition from bronze to iron wasn't just a switch of materials. It was a fundamental restructuring of human society. It toppled empires, built new ones, leveled forests, and fed billions. It took the power of the earth and put it in the hands of the many. To fully grasp the scale of the Iron Age, we must look deeper into the terrifying efficiency of the Assyrian army. They were the first to use distinct uniforms and standardized equipment. This wasn't a ragtag militia. It was a professional killing machine, organized into units of charioteers, cavalry, and infantry. The Assyrian cavalry, specifically, changed the speed of war. Before this, horses pulled chariots, but with better iron bits and rigorous training, soldiers began fighting directly from horseback. This increased mobility allowed them to outflank enemies and pursue fleeing forces with deadly speed. But empires built on fear often crumble. The Babylonians and Medes eventually united to overthrow Assyria. They burned the great library of Nineveh, ironically baking the clay tablets and preserving the knowledge for us to find thousands of years later. Even in destruction, the Iron Age preserved its history. Following the chaos, the Neo-Babylonian Empire rose. King Nebuchadnezzar II used iron tools to build the legendary Hanging Gardens and the massive Ishtar Gate. Iron wasn't just for war. It was used to reinforce the blue-glazed bricks that stunned visitors from across the world. Further east, the Indian Iron Age saw the production of Wootz steel. This crucible steel was of such high quality that it was exported to Rome and later the Islamic world. It was a secret technology that produced blades capable of cutting through a falling silk scarf. In the Mediterranean, the Greeks relied on the hoplite phalanx. While their armor was often bronze, their weapons were iron. The Xiphos short sword and the leaf-shaped spear tip were made of iron. This formation required discipline and trust, traits that defined the Greek city-states.
Then came the Macedonians. Philip II and his son, Alexander the Great, lengthened the spear into the Sarissa, an 18-foot pike tipped with iron. This simple innovation, made possible by the strength of iron, allowed Alexander to smash through the Persian Empire and conquer all the way to India.
The Iron Age also saw the rise of the nomads. The Scythians of the Eurasian steppe were masters of the iron-tipped arrow. They lived in the saddle. Their iron craftsmanship in the animal style, gold and iron jewelry depicting beasts, showed that these warriors were also sophisticated artists. We must not forget the humble nail.
Before the Iron Age, joinery was complex, using wooden pegs and joints. The mass-produced iron nail revolutionized carpentry. Houses, ships, and furniture could be built faster and stronger. It is perhaps the most underrated invention of the era. Shipbuilding advanced with these new tools. Iron adzes and saws allowed shipwrights to shape planks with greater precision. This led to the biremes and triremes, warships that turned the Mediterranean into a superhighway for commerce and conflict. The psychological impact of iron cannot be overstated. In the Bronze Age, metal was soft and warm. Iron is cold, hard, and magnetic. It was associated with the planet Mars and the gods of war. It changed how humanity viewed nature, not as something to coexist with, but something to conquer. In Northern Europe, the bog bodies give us a glimpse into the ritual life of the Iron Age. People were sacrificed and placed in peat bogs, often pinned down with wooden or iron stakes. These perfectly preserved bodies tell us of a society that was deeply superstitious and violent. The spread of iron also meant the spread of the wheel. The Celtic chariot was a marvel of engineering, with iron tires shrunk onto wooden wheels. They were so effective that Julius Caesar himself wrote about the terror they inspired in his legions during the invasion of Britain. Let's talk about the domestic revolution again. The quernstone. While made of stone, it was shaped by iron chisels. The rotary quern allowed for flour to be ground much faster than the old saddle quern. This freed up hours of labor every day, mostly for women, changing the domestic dynamic.
Iron even influenced fashion. The fibula, an iron safety pin or brooch, became the standard way to fasten cloaks and tunics. It replaced straight pins and intricate knots. These brooches became status symbols, often decorated, but at their core, they were practical iron tools.
The concept of the state solidified. With iron weapons allowing for larger armies, kings could project power further. Borders became harder, defined by forts and garrisons. The fluid boundaries of the Bronze Age were replaced by the rigid frontiers of Iron Age kingdoms. In the Levant, the collapse of the major powers allowed smaller states to flourish, like Israel and Judah. The Bible is written in this context. Passages about chariots of iron reflect the genuine fear and awe these weapons inspired in the hill tribes who were still transitioning from bronze.
Mining became an industry of misery. Slaves were sent into deep, dangerous shafts to extract the ore. The Roman mines in Spain were massive operations, moving mountains of earth. The wealth of the Iron Age was built on the backs of those who lived and died in the dark.
Yet, this abundance of metal sparked creativity. Iron scissors were invented, changing the textile industry. Iron shears allowed sheep to be shorn in one piece, revolutionizing the wool trade. The simple hinge allowed for doors and chests to function smoothly. The world became more mechanical. The Iron Age also saw the first true synthesis of East and West. The Silk Road began to form. Iron from China, steel from India, and goods from Rome traveled thousands of miles. It was a global economy powered by the durability of iron transport and the security of iron weapons. As we moved into the later Iron Age, the Romans perfected the use of concrete, but they reinforced their structures with iron ties. The Pantheon's portico is held together by hidden iron. They understood that stone has compression strength, but iron has tensile strength, a perfect marriage. The decline of the Iron Age is hard to pinpoint because it didn't really end, it evolved. In Europe, the migration period saw the collapse of Rome, but the barbarian tribes were masters of iron. The sword patterns, the helmets, the shields, they carried the technology into the Middle Ages. We often call the next period the Dark Ages, but metallurgically it was brilliant. The skills developed during the Iron Age were refined. The bloomery furnaces became larger, eventually evolving into the blast furnaces that would spark the Industrial Revolution. The fire was never extinguished. The legacy of the Iron Age is written in our blood. The very hemoglobin that carries oxygen in our veins relies on iron. We are biological creatures of iron, living in a world built of iron, recounting a history forged in iron. The Iron Age taught us that resources dictate destiny. The shift from bronze to iron proved that when a material becomes abundant, it changes society from the bottom up. It is a lesson we would do well to remember as we look for the materials of the future. From the Hittites who guarded the secret, to the Romans who industrialized it, to the blacksmith in the village, the story of iron is the story of human ingenuity. It is the story of how we took a rock and turned it into civilization. This era was defined by the clashing of swords and the turning of soil. It was a time of immense cruelty and immense progress. It was the crucible in which the modern world was smelted. From the humble bloomery furnace to the legions of Rome, iron proved that he who controls the metal controls the world. The Iron Age forged the weapons of our destruction, but also the tools of our survival. It is the backbone of civilization as we know it. Thank you for watching this deep dive into the Iron Age. If you're fascinated by how materials shape history, check out our video on the Bronze Age collapse to see how this all began. Don't forget to like this video if you learned something new. It helps the channel forge ahead, and I'll see you in the next era. If you enjoyed this journey through the sparks and the soil, make sure to subscribe. We have many more ages of history to explore, from the Stone Age to the Atomic Age. Let us know in the comments which era you want to see forged next.
Thanks for watching. Keep learning and keep questioning history.